Okay, we've talked about the role of the government, what the government does. It's an employer, it's a producer, and it's a consumer. Those three things, and we talked about public expenditure, how it consumes and produces, and what the objectives of public expenditure are, because they're not the same objectives as we have or a business has in their lives. It's something on a different level. And then GDP, we talked about GDP, what it is, and its calculation, etc. And the limits to what it is. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to look a bit more about the macroeconomy. Remember, the macroeconomy is the economy in the big picture. And you're talking about economic indicators like inflation, unemployment, GDP, fiscal pressure, these types of things, to look at the economy in a big way, not in a small way, the microeconomy, where we look at the markets and how they work and different strategies and different types of markets, etc. So now we're going to talk about the macroeconomy and something very important called aggregate demand. Very important, because when we talk about government economic policy a bit later, we need to think about aggregate demand and whether it should be more or less, etc. Now, first of all, what is aggregate demand? Well, we talked about demand in the microeconomy, in the demand and supply diagrams. We're talking about a particular specific product. But in aggregate demand, we're talking about all the demand together. So we're talking about the macroeconomy, all the demand put together. It's abstract, normally not given a number, but it's an abstract theory. And we talk about it because, if we want more demand in the economy, if there's a crisis, and people are losing jobs, we want more demand. We want to increase aggregate demand. Or if there's inflation, we want to reduce aggregate demand. Aggregate demand broken down is all the consumer expenditure, all the investment, all the public expenditure, and exports too. So we can talk about this as everything, all the demand together. And normally all the demand together for all the products, we're talking on this, it's not the quantity of a specific product, but real GDP. Real GDP is GDP adjusted change for inflation. To take into account inflation, so it's the real increase or decrease in GDP. So real GDP we have on this side, and on this axis we've got the prices of products as an average. This is very abstract and hypothetical. So we're not talking about numbers, but we can see it as aggregate demand increases as prices decrease. So if prices go down, demand increases for all. So the real GDP goes up. Output can go up if prices go down. If prices go up, output, the GDP, or PIL in Italian, goes down. The demand for products, also the total demand. Okay, very important. Now we're going to look at government macroeconomic objectives. These macroeconomic objectives will be what their what their policy, their economic policy is to reach. What are they trying to do in the economy? How are they trying to change our reality? What are their objectives, their goals? First of all, they will want a low rate, or stable at least, of inflation. Some inflation, an economy can do well out of some inflation. Even, many economies seem to go okay, even with 10, 15%. If it's controlled, if it's under control. But the problem is, inflation is difficult to control. When it starts going up, it has a momentum, it accelerates. If I see prices going up for houses, maybe I buy a house quick for my son, or maybe I buy houses to invest. And as people buy more quickly, prices go up even more. So it has this tendency to get out of control. So it wants a stable rate of inflation. If there's a stable rate of inflation, people can plan business investments, can plan big projects of economic activity, knowing what the inflation rate will be, so being able to plan for profit. Here we see in the pictures people maybe taking home their wages. In Germany, it got so bad, people would carry, bags of money home and have to spend them quick before they lose value in the shops. Or here we've got children playing with money because they have no value. In the end, they become like paper. And you've got a woman here with a dress made of money, because the money has lost its value. It loses value. When there's inflation, it loses value. Okay, another economic objective, which is very, very important in Italy, is a high and stable level of employment. We want everyone to have jobs. In Italy, you've got Article 1 of the Constitution that says, la Repubblica è fondato sul lavoro. We understand that work is, what Italy is. Our relationships, we relate to each other, we integrate much better when we're working together, when we're doing something, we've got a common project. When people are working, they have strong feeling of belonging to a group. We know that. And in Article 4, another fundamental principle in the Constitution, you've got diritto di lavoro. La Repubblica riconosce il diritto di lavoro. Doesn't guarantee it. It can't guarantee lavoro because obviously it's a free market. So people can lose jobs. It's not a totally planned economy. So it can't guarantee work. It must promote the conditions. If you look at Article 4, it promotes the conditions in which work will be given to everybody, hopefully. And then it's later on in the other titoli, in the economic title, it talks about work being protected, and even in the Constitution it talks about earning a dignified wage to keep yourself and your family. It says, so work is very important for the government macroeconomic objectives. We'll see later on what the government policy, economic policy, can be to reach that. And Italy, as it's there in the fundamental principles and later on in the economic chapter, it really makes a big effort on this side, on the work side. Less effort on the inflation side, shall we say, because inflation is not spoken about. It does, for inflation, the Constitution does talk. There is an article in the Constitution which talks about protecting savers. And if you think about it, inflation really hurts savers. So people who save money, if there's a lot of inflation, maybe if you have 500,000 in your bank for your son, for a house, to buy a house later, in 10 years when you go to buy the house, all the houses have doubled in price, your 500,000 won't be able to buy a house. So it does talk about protecting savers, which would be about controlling inflation too. And then you've got economic growth and increased standard of living. We want, people to have better lives. Here we can see Italy, when there's a great development, people were buying mopeds. Italians were able to buy washing machines and cameras and televisions. This was the objective of the government economic policy, to increase economic growth and standard of living, because then people are happier. People feel they are progressing in life. And that also may be in our time off from work. I've mentioned before that, by having more time off, that is economic progress. We have, a lot of holidays. We retire for 30 years and we start work normally after university, etc., etc. So we do have this time off, which is about standard of living, and you need economic growth for that. But generally, economic growth and standard of living means, at the moment, everybody's got a mobile phone and able to live in a house, have a car. Many years ago, not everybody had a car. Now everyone's got a car, nearly everyone. So these are the indicators of economic growth and increased standard of living. Okay, so we talked about that. What could show an increased standard of living? We can see, for example, a greener economy would show an economic growth. If we're investing in these technologies, we're developing our economy so it's green, suddenly energy will be cheaper for people. The sun gives us energy, and we don't have to go to the Middle East and pay a lot of money. But we need the infrastructure in place. We would have more technology and equipment and better health service. Very expensive. This is a key indicator of our economic growth and standard of living, because it's very expensive, especially medicine is very, very expensive. Some medicines can cost thousands and thousands for one pill. And then, yes, peace. When we're doing well, when we're feeling we're progressing, we've got, good dignity, etc., generally we have social peace and people live better together. So I think this could show economic. Normally, when things are very bad economically, there's a lot of protest, a lot of crime, a lot of problems, social problems, drug problems, etc. And then, yes, more technology in the classroom. We need computers for every student, for example. Very expensive. And then, yes, more holidays, more time to spend with our children, etc. Also, a government's macroeconomic objective would be a stable balance of international trade and payments. So we would want to export and import on the same level. If, for example, at the moment, America has got this big conflict or a tension, shall we say, with China, because it says China is reducing costs and America's buying a lot more from China than China is from America, and that causes problems. Later on we'll see what problems that causes, but it does cause problems. It causes problems for the value of the money, for example, and for jobs, etc. So the government's macroeconomic objective will be to have a stable balance of international trade and payments. We want to produce as much as we want to export as much as we import. Otherwise, we will have problems. If we're just buying from abroad and not selling to abroad, in the end our money is not worth much. We'll see why later on, but and then life will get more and more expensive. Also, just to mention, in this last, tourism is actually an export for Italy. So when we have millions and millions of tourists come and spend lots of money in Italy, that is an export. That's what Italians produce for the world, to sell to the world. So that's a very good export of Italy. Another one is to reduce poverty and inequalities. Here we've got pictures which show, people get into positions of power and then become privileged. They stop others coming up the ladder of progress by, using ways of inhibiting people. Maybe if you become very, very rich, you can put your money in different places to hide it from the tax man, maybe abroad, etc. Even legally. Very difficult. Maybe you buy all the houses, local houses, so people have to rent from you, and then you can charge a lot in rent, etc. And people can't buy houses if very rich people are buying them because the prices go up, etc., etc. So reduce poverty and inequalities. This is very important for Italy, because you've got the Article 3 of the fundamental principles that says the state must remove obstacles which impede the growth of people, and obstacles which reduce our equality and freedom. And we're talking here principally about health and education, but other things, other things which stop us going ahead. Okay, so that's another objective. And then, of course, we've got the reduction in pollution and waste. Here we can see, before the coronavirus, Paris was very polluted. After, how wonderful the environment looks, and that has a big impact economically. If people are choking and having problems and off sick from work, and it costs money. The economy can't. One of the big problems in Africa is health. That's one of the biggest economic inhibitors. And then we've got all this waste and what to do with. So the government's macroeconomic objective needs to be reducing pollution and waste, and by creating a cyclical economy, the government can really create a much richer economy, really increase standards of living. If we did put the infrastructure down for green energy, not only would we reduce the pollution, but also we would increase our wealth, our richness, because we spend so much money with Middle Eastern countries, which often use the money to preserve very questionable regimes, very questionable dictatorships, and a lot of wealth leaves Italy. Whereas the sun, if it can be collected, the wind, if it can be collected and stored, and there's the infrastructure, becomes very cheap in the long term. In the short term, it's expensive because you need to put the infrastructure down. But that's got to be a very important objective.